Okay, so to begin our conference, learn why the future isn't what it used to be, with one of the few professionally trained futurists on the planet. David Zock has insights into the funny, fascinating, and thought-provoking strategic trends and traditions that we may encounter, and in addition, he has some very interesting observations about our world as it is right now. Please join me in welcoming David.
Hi, welcome to the future. Where else would you be? And can everybody hear me okay? Yes. All right, so I have approximately 55 minutes in which to explain the future. It means I'm going to leave out some of the details. And I do apologize right now for the slides because I work on a Mac, but we have ported over to a PC, and there are certain things that don't translate, like the line was supposed to actually go all the way over there, but what are you going to do? This is the future. You just have to go with it, right? All right. It is also titled Confessions of a Former Futurist because as of August 15th of this year, my 60th birthday, I decided to quit being a futurist. I had done like 1,500 talks for 30 years, and after all that speaking, maybe it's time to shut up a little bit and listen. So for instance, one of the things I'm doing is I'm working on a research project just to talk to creatives and find out how do they finish. How do you finish things? Because we all know how to start things, but we all have gotten to the point where you are working on something and you run out of steam, but you still have to get it done. So I've just been interviewing and collecting interesting sort of tools, tactics, and tricks of how you do that. So if you want to talk to me about that afterwards, I'm going to be here for the whole event. So. All right. Distraction as competition. Your competition is the thing you're holding up, pointing at me right now. See? Ta-da. There is that, yeah. But think about how we relate to these things. We cradle them. We gaze into them. We stroke them. We talk to them. We listen to them. There's just two words missing to explain it all. My precious. And the worst part is, I'm not kidding. Our behavior with these things is indistinguishable from either an addiction or, much, much worse, worship. This image I found on a magazine from 1916. So it's 101 years old. Now here's the cool thing. So they imagined the idea of video phones. They didn't imagine wireless. And if you look at the top of the image, they didn't imagine backlighting. But the idea is not new. But how has it changed us? As the saying goes, first we shape our tools and then our tools shape us. Here's one way it's shaping us. When I make eye contact for the first time, I want it to be with the right person. And it's amazing how eye contact seems to be an endangered species, as it were. And that's a reasonably good thing for us to have, being able to make eye contact. So, 2017, this is what happens in an internet minute. 900,000 Facebook logins, 3.5 million Google search queries, 990,000 Tinder swipes. Hopefully that's not going on right now. Is this what you want? Attention is the most valuable resource in the economy. And we just give it away, or we allow it to be seduced. Because maybe that's easier. In The Onion, chipmunks plan for future better crafted than 8 out of 10 Americans. I hate to sound conspiratorial, but I think the distraction is intentional. If you keep people distracted, they're much easier to manipulate. when we cannot concentrate, when we cannot focus, we become increasingly subject to the whims of the incredibly articulate. And it was Robert Putnam, he said of Random House Publishing, he said, in an age of information, only intuition can protect you from the most dangerous individual of all, the articulate incompetent. Again, we become vulnerable. This is a contact lens with a built-in digital display. Good news and bad news. It's at MIT. It's just a prototype. There's like 64 dots square, so the resolution is quite minimal. They expect it to be powered by you blinking, and as your eyelids roll over the lens, it does these little sort of generates energy to power it. So the bad news is they're just prototypes. The good news is they'll be wireless. Bruce Sterling, science fiction writer, said, maybe we're radically changing the operating system of the human condition. If so, this would be a really good time to make backups of our civilization. Because it's so easy to toss things aside. It is incredibly easy to judge the past. Because the future isn't around to judge us. But I guarantee you, it will look back and go, who were these people? They think that. 1910, 3/4 of U.S. towns of 2,500 or more had Carnegie libraries. 2,509 were built between 1883 and 1929. This one in Monroe, Wisconsin, my hometown. In 2013, 28% of U.S. adults never read a book. So there was a book that came out this year called The Inevitable, Kevin Kelly. And he was one of the people that founded Fast Company, I think, or Wired. And he talks about there are two types of people. People of the screen and people of the book. And think about how different those formats are. And how the screen information is always new, it's always updated. And so we're constantly scrolling it to see, is there something new that I need to know in order to thrive, in order to survive? And that to me, they're sort of like digital refrigerators. You ever been between meals? You go to the fridge, open it up, look in there, see if there's anything you want to eat. No? You close it, wander around, come back to it, open it up, see if there's anything new that showed up. And that's the internet. We keep scrolling until something triggers endorphins of some sort. Oh, okay, we got this. Books are different. They have to think about it. It has to be curated. It has to be edited. Very different things. And we prefer one, or we are more seduced by one than the other. So here's a suggestion for this segment of the talk. News versus olds. How many took in any news today? Okay. How many took in any olds? And for how many of you do I have to explain what olds are? You know what news is? The stuff that changed since yesterday that you might need in order to navigate. Therefore, olds would be the stuff that hasn't changed since yesterday that you might need to know in order to navigate. Which is there more of? Olds. You're going to have to dig through it. And that takes reasoning skills. Because not all old things are good. But not all new things are good. Just because it's new doesn't mean it's good. Just because it's old doesn't mean it's outdated. And the older I get, the more I agree with that. And as you get older, you're going to agree with it as well. How do we at least learn to balance those things? How do we step back from the screens? So being a sort of a futurist. I have the new Apple Watch. That's the phone. And here's the thing. I left my phone in my hotel room. This doesn't allow me to scroll. This doesn't allow me to go on the internet. I can check emails, I can get texts. But this protects my attention. I don't think Apple knew this. They didn't. And how about this? New versus old. Now, if this was a Mac, all those transitions would have happened at once. They line them up apparently. So Heraclitus said, some 2,500 years ago, nothing endures but change. How many of you agree with that? How many of you are afraid to raise your hand in front of me? Okay, so here's the paradox. If nothing endures but change, then how come this 25-year-old statement is still there? It endured. That maybe there is truth that we can discern through the years, and it may be incredibly difficult for us to understand and recognize truth, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Are there things about architecture that will always be true? Are there things about architects that will always be true? And if you can't answer that question, then maybe you need to learn better how to ask questions, which is something architects pride themselves on. So the second segment here, the yes and economy. How many of you have ever taken improv theater training? Okay, very few of you, but thanks for coming. And here's one of the essential things about improv theater training. Normally our world is a lot of yes buts. Yeah, but. So there's these shields that go up. And improv theater trains you to lower the shields. Something odd, weird is thrown at you, and you go yes. And you go and. You take it, you connect it. You throw it here, you throw it there, but it's always about connecting things. And the basic notion is that wealth comes from connections. And our ability to connect people, things, and ideas, especially people, things, and ideas we didn't think were connectable, that's how we create wealth. And that's what we need more of, as long as we understand that wealth is not just dollars and cents, it's everything that has value. How do we create it? How do we enhance it? But the economy today is two main forces, creativity and logistics. And I was just reading something on the plane coming out, and it was talking about competence and efficiency. That those things are really driving the economy. But think about how architecture, which is a paradoxical field, form and function, strength and beauty, art and science. It's one of the few fields, I think, that really embraces, in essence, is a paradox. It is this and that. So you may be better prepared to help lead into the future than most occupations. But are you? Or are you being so distracted and being so forced through the pixels you don't look up? The mystery writer Jean Le Carre said, "A desk is a dangerous place from which to observe the world." And maybe your desk is the enemy. You've heard the phrase, there's an app for that. If there's an app for that, is there an app for you? And here's the thing we don't notice. We don't notice automation taking over white-collar jobs. We notice it blue-collar jobs, which tend to be one or two tasks. But the way that we can increasingly become outdated and how it comes in from the sidelines, from unexpected places, that's the real struggle in terms of facing automation. But like Google cars, I think we're going to see these a lot faster than most of us believe, in part because it fits in with a very distracted environment. So if we don't have to pay attention, I read a report that said, if you have a Google car, there will be 3 things certain in your life. Number 1, you will be more efficient. Number 2, you will be safer. And number 3, you will be celibate. Nobody's ever getting lucky in a car ever again. They have little birds on there. So, and I'm not going to get into 3D printing because you know about that and the advances that are coming. And then nanotechnology, which is sort of the technology beyond that, where the idea that we could grow things, grow a wall, grow a chair, grow a sport coat, grow a remote control. Think about genetic coding. You know, your DNA is an instruction manual that's microscopic, and it built you, and it basically sustains you. Would it be that much more complex to start building floors, bypass the tree, bypass the foundry, things like that? Do you know about the diagnostic toilet that Toto developed? Now, they've sold it off. I'm not sure what's happening with it. But basically, it would take your weight and blood pressure along with diagnostics. How many of you are just freaking out about that? What would a diagnostic toilet take from you besides the obvious? What's the issue when people freak out about it? It's privacy, yeah. And privacy is what you need in order to be an individual. And yet we all know people who either have or have had cancer. And what if a device like that can catch it the day it starts or 9 months before it starts as opposed to a day too late? And so the issue is not the technology. The issue is the sort of the philosophy and theology that goes behind it for us to be able to answer a question, what is it to be a human being? What do we preserve about privacy? What do we let go of? We don't know how to answer those questions. The easiest way to be a futurist is to think about implications times 3. We're really, really good at going, if this, then that. We built this, we designed this, we do this, this is going to happen. But what else happens? What are the implications of the implications of the implications? And it's not that you are trying to exactly predict the future. Because as somebody with a degree in futures research from the University of Houston, real degree, real university, I know that I have no ability to predict the future. Because if I could, no offense, would I be here? No, I'd have my own island with supermodels protecting. And that hasn't happened yet. It's not about predicting. It's about being aware of the possibilities and the opportunities and a broader range of those things than just what is obvious. So it's implications times 3. And then think about, when you think about the future, are you looking for a comfortable future or a hopeful future? Because I think those are really distinct. Comfortable is sort of the Barco lounger where we just sit in the chair and go, I'm tired. I'm just trying to get the job done. I don't want to have to think about this. You know what happens to those people? Their futures go away. Somebody else takes it because of hunger and aggression and whatever else that goes into the formula. Hope's a very, very different thing. You can react one of 2 ways. Anyways, these are the 2 I'm going to talk about. You can retreat, you can pull in, you can settle into some quiet place where you don't have to struggle, you don't have to think. Or there is a marvelous word in Spanish called querencia. And it comes from the bull ring. When the bull finally figures out what that guy in the weird outfit is doing, it begins to retreat back to where it came in. And the great definition I found is this: a place from which one's strength of character is drawn, a place in which we know exactly who we are, the place from which we speak our deepest beliefs. Did anybody talk to you about that in architecture school? Do they talk about it in these forums, and it is a sense of foundation. You give me a place to stand, I can move the world. But how can you do that in a world where nothing is certain? Nothing is continuous. It's all changeable. Nothing endures but change. If the only thing that endures but change, then to hell with all of this. Because anything goes. Maybe, here's the thing. Maybe this mess, we sort of have the sense of the future like this, but this is the future. Doesn't make sense. We don't know where it's going. Think about the Italian Renaissance. We look back at it and go, wow, amazing. All these new ways of learning, thinking, creating, living. But if you were in the middle of it, looking forward, you were scared to death because it was the end of the world as you knew it. Does this sound familiar? Maybe that's what this is. How many of you saw the movie, The Third Man with Orson Welles? Okay, a few more. Not many in most of my audiences. So, and I apologize because the text is going to get a little weird just because of the translation from Mac to PC. So his character in the movie had a little soliloquy. In Italy, for 30 years under the Borgias, they had warfare, terror, murder, and bloodshed, but they produced Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, and the Renaissance. In Switzerland, they had brotherly love. They had 500 years of democracy and peace, and what did that produce? The cuckoo clock. What price are you willing to pay to have Renaissance? Weird harmonics with the water. See, eventually it's going to kind of clear out, but it may be in a very different direction than we thought, and there will be a price to pay for it. There is always a price to pay for it. What are you willing to pay for? What are you willing to stand for? What are you going to fall for? What's the price of Renaissance? Or maybe not. So Peter Thiel, one of the founders of PayPal, wrote a book called 0 to 1. And in there he said that the world fits into these 4 quadrants. So countries, definite optimists, indefinite pessimists, definite pessimists. USA pre-1970s, we were a definite optimist country. You give us a challenge, put a man on the moon, build a Hoover Dam, build the interstate system, we'll do it. We don't know how we're going to do it, we're going to figure it out. We believed in our ability to solve problems. And then the 1970s happened. We became indefinite optimists. We are as optimistic as we ever were, at least until the last year or so. And money became the goal. We're optimistic. We don't know how we're going to do it. That's going to be a problem. Indefinite pessimists, most of the world. He said one country is definite pessimist. Which one? I'm a futurist, not a telepathist. You have to verbalize the answers. North Korea, yeah. That's just plain nuts. China. He says every single country in the world is worried that China's going to take over, except for one country, China. China is the only country that's worried it won't be able to do that. Now, curious thing about, there were 6 founders of PayPal. 4 of them did what during high school? Nice guess. Not dropped out. Musicians? No, might be, I don't know. They made bombs. They made bombs. And now they're billionaires. What do y'all do with your delinquents? Indefinite optimism does not last. Your philosophy matters more than your plans. Foundational. So here's the difference between optimism, pessimism, and hope. And this is a marvelous old postcard I found that says, "This is a Sullivan building. He is Frank Lloyd Wright's rival and peer, to my way of thinking." What I love about this postcard is all the background is taken away, but they kept the little mailbox down in the corner for some reason. But think about the optimism that went with the invention of that style, of that presentation, of that little bank, and the various jewel boxes, and all the other things. That it's one thing to be innovative now in an age of innovation, but when you were in an age of stultification and you came through with something new, that's pretty interesting. So optimism is about being cheerful when things go your way, but it's fragile. It's very practical, but it's fragile, because when it doesn't go your way, then it can turn to pessimism, cynicism, rage, anger, hatred. And hope got misused as a political term, because that was not hope, that was optimism. Hope's one of the great theological virtues: hope, faith, love. And here's the thing, they are paradoxical concepts. So the story of Beauty and the Beast, it's about loving the unlovable. And hope's great power is not that you're cheerful when things are going your way, but you remain hopeful when things are hopeless. And you fight the hopeless battle and still hope to win. And we're in a time right now where you see people just giving up because it's just too crazy from all different directions. How you find hope in that, that's the challenge. That's the gauntlet thrown down in front of you. Oh, that tree. So this is my neighborhood in Milwaukee, and they cut off all the branches. You know, it's still sprouted. It's like, the hell with you, we're still going to do it. We're still going to try. Unfortunately, they cut down the whole tree then. So this is one of my favorite images that I've created. So when I was on the AIA board as a public director between 2010 and 2013, and then I keynoted AIAS 4 years in a row, and twice just by accident because I was there coaching the candidates, and speakers, plane or whatever got delayed or canceled, and so I just filled in. But they were really fun to work with, and in 2012, when the market wasn't looking very good, I surveyed AIS students across the country and said, okay, if you don't become an architect, what else might you do? Then I took all their answers and put it into Wordle.net, and it creates word clouds. So the more the word shows up in an answer, the larger the word becomes. Anything jump out at you there? And here's the thing. This to me is a sign of hope amongst those students. See, if you're a little bit older than those students, you may become a little cynical and skeptical, and that's your issue, not theirs. They still have this tremendous hope about the future. And what the answers were saying is, I will design. I will be a designer. Your boundary issues. This is an architect. This is an engineer. This is a landscape architect. This is a cook. This is a chef. This is an artist. Those boundaries are artificial. They may be necessary because we kind of do need boundaries in order to achieve and be able to ask the right questions. But the boundaries may have to shift as the world shifts, as the technology shifts. How many of you are familiar with SEGD, Society for Experiential Graphic Design? So it's a confluence organization. So there are architects there are graphic designers, there are lighting people, there are landscape architects. So it's all the different types of designers coming together. And one of their founders said, I see no borders to this field. We don't know where that's going, but that's exciting too. Maybe your borders are too strong, too firm for the world as it exists now. And I think it was about 3 years ago, I worked with the Vinyl Institute. We had a panel, and this whole event, and I brought together Billy Faircloth, who is architect out in Philly, I believe, and then Dwayne Euler and Jonathan Thayer, who are designers. And looking at the issue of how do we design things. Billy Faircloth has a marvelous Philly TEDx talk that is all about the 2x4 and what we don't know about 2x4s. For instance, they're not 2x4, but you know that. Most people don't. But she gets into the molecular structure of wood. And she said all materials are emerging materials if you look at it the right way. And she had this very big question of why do we design the way we do? And maybe you think too much like architects. And sort of the great thing is that architects think more like a broader world than most occupations. But is it getting too structured? She talked about why industries and organizations, why they don't cross-collaborate anymore. And she said in the 1950s and 60s, there was this tremendous amount of convergence and collaboration across the industries, basically with vinyl and in the chemical industries. And then there was a lawsuit in I think the late 60s, and it shut all the conversations down. But there was this tremendous cross-fertilization that was going on back then. So if architecture can be a re-emerging profession, how can you be a re-emerging profession? Particularly in the face of all the technology and whatnot. So ask yourself questions like, what can you do that cannot be automated? Is anyone going to pay you to do that? Is it legal for them to pay you to do that? Question to ask. What's your 80-20? So Pareto's law, 80% of the wealth is controlled by 20% of the people, or 80% of the problems caused by 20% of the people. If 80% of what you do is better done by a machine, what's the unique 20%? What is it about an architect for which there is not an app? And can you answer that question? Because the technology is coming for you. The Latin roots of vocation and education. I don't speak Latin, but there they are. Vocation means calling. Education, the origin is to draw out what is already there. So how do we coordinate with the educational world, with the professional world, to hear the calling and to draw out of you what those natural talents are? And there's tremendous, because of big data, there is tremendous ability now to draw that out of people, to better understand what our natural talents are, and then what our gaps are. Best course I ever took was called Life Work Planning in grad school, in which we were forced, for instance, go through the book, What Color's Your Parachute? In which we had to do the practices, do the tests, and the result was we had a very good snapshot of what our skill sets were, what our skill gaps were. And it's interesting in terms of, we talk about young professionals, and one of the things that, for instance, millennials do is they go, we're collaborative. It's worn more like a cloak. I'm not sure. I mean, I think it's something that can be definitely enhanced and a skill that can be strengthened. But through collaboration, you can deal with the skill gaps and recognize, I'm not good at this. But then how do you discern it in others to say, yes, that is something they do? And Earl Nightingale, he was a motivational speaker. He said, the biggest mistake you'll ever make in your life is to believe that you work for somebody else. And I think that that is something we particularly have to tell the young people coming out in those schools to be much more entrepreneurial. And when they are put into massive debt with an educational degree and then not taught how to get out of debt, particularly in entrepreneurial, that's bordering on criminal behavior. And one of the things I got into with the board is, when I was on the board, we wanted more HSW credits. And I said, no, we want more poetry. Meaning, we focus on the measurable. What are the immeasurables? Why aren't we learning more about how architects can be more interesting people within their communities and know about so many things? And one of the things I found is in talking with so many architects is how they have these creative hobbies. Painting, cooking, what have you. And one of the problems is so much of work is no longer, I think, asking for that creative side because the technical side is taking over. So I think we need more architects, but we're always telling architects and students to rebel, but I'm not sure if that's the right thing. We have this idea of this is a pirate. This is a pirate. And it's the test of hope. There's a roadblock with no obvious reason. So do you just park it and go, well, I guess we're done. Or do you go, no, let's drive around this. WWRN. What works right now? There is a book called The Pirate Organization, and he talks about the concept of a pirate. That term, pirate, comes from a Greek word meaning to put to the test. And pirates weren't always outlaws. They were always weaving around the edge of the law, figuring out what works. What works right here, right now. So, here's this book, Kevin Kelly, The Inevitable. And in there he goes, there has never been a better day in the whole history of the world to invent something. There has never been a better time with more opportunities, more openings, lower barriers, higher benefit ratios, better returns, greater upside than now. Right now, this minute. This is the moment that folks in the future will look back and say, oh, to have been alive and well back then. Maybe because we're in the midst of Renaissance. What are you going to do with that? Third section. This is about drawing, connecting, and how many of you have read Johanny Palasma's, in English, it's The Thinking Hand. In Spanish, I think it just looks much better, La mano que bien. With a cooler cover. But in there he goes, the use of the computer has broken the sensual and tactile connection between imagination and the object of design. Where when we reduce design down to a single digit, click, 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 the one skill, so on the board, and it may have even been you, somebody introduced me at one point as an architect wannabe. It was you or somebody else who looked at him and went, I don't think he's ever wanted to be an architect. I've never wanted to be an architect because I've never had the competence to become an architect. There is that. But the one skill that I am most jealous of is the ability to draw, and it seems to be the skill that's going away. And when I surveyed architectural students up at University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee about what did they want more of, drawing was the clear thing on the top of the list. And I think that there is something about that is almost a magical skill that the computer doesn't know how to translate, that the computer loses. I now keep, this is one of the things that I'm most grateful, I now keep journals. I learned this from you folks. I have over 10 years of them. They are in lock boxes. They're an extension of my brain, as it were. This was in New York Review of Books, 2014. It said, there is something predatory, cruel even, about a pen suspended over a text like a hawk over a field is on the lookout for something vulnerable. The mere fact of holding the hand poised for action changes our attitude to the text. We are no longer passive consumers of monologue, but active participants in a dialogue. That's why I believe in books. That's why I buy paper books. If it's a novel, it's on a Kindle. But if it's a regular book, I am constantly writing in it because I am engaging. And I do want to think. I do want to have this conversation. what I taught, I might have even been in the philosophy book. But I learned that if you want to write down your notes, respect them, honor them, have really nice notebooks and really nice pens, because there is some value in that. By the way, that lovely woman there, that would be my mom. I was looking for around for somebody like writing and reading, and then I remembered this one. I think we have to get into bigger thoughts, bigger issues. We have to learn to wrestle with them. And the easiest way to do that is through great literature. Anything written by Roy Peter Clark is worth reading. He's a writing teacher, basically. But this is on where he goes, how the secrets of 25 great works of literature will improve your writing, but it also improves your thinking. Because those books present great ways of wrestling with the bigger issues. And Milton Friedman said the power to do good is also the power to do harm. And I think it's because we haven't wrestled with enough of those broader issues. So Grace Law is, I think she's still in faculty at UW, University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. And they brought me in as part of their commentary when they were looking at this issue. And it was all about how can we have this great, we can build a world without cars, without roads, and how we could radically transform the world. And it was this tremendously optimistic vision of the future. And I kept thinking, you are putting all these constraints on people. Maybe good, and I asked the question, when it was my turn, I said, how many of you have ever had any philosophy or theology? And the response was laughter, mostly from faculty. I thought, really? How can you make these big of decisions and not know, not have a better grasp of the implications of the implications of the implications? I was at it was called Rural 2010. It was a rural economics conference up in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, back in 2010. Then the lieutenant governor of Idaho said, here's the thing about America. Here, small ideas are as important as big ideas. And I thought that was marvelous, that was beautiful, because it should be true. Because every great idea started small. And if we think we're done, if we think we've discovered the truth and we now have what all that's necessary in order to work, we're incredibly naive and incredibly arrogant. Small ideas. And sometimes the best small ideas stay small. This obsession with growth, this obsession with bigness for everything, for everybody, doesn't make any sense to me. And then I got to hear Joel Kotkin talk about economic plans, and there was a lot in his book about some of Robert Moses' arguments with Jane Jacobs, and this great line of, there is nobody against this plan, nobody but a bunch of mothers. It's one of those things where you go, wait, what? When we were on the board, I believe it was the mayor of Charlottesville who had been brought in to speak, and he said, nothing about us without us is for us. And that was one of my great takeaways from the board, because it was just so, it's an old Latin saying. It's been around for a very long time. But when thinking about planning, community planning, any of your plans that involves people you don't know, how do we know? And the presumption that we have. Did you ever hear the phrase that when the scientists finally find the center of the universe, there's going to be a whole bunch of people are going to be disappointed to find out it's not them? And I found this great tweet from Melissa Pierce. She's a filmmaker in Chicago. So many buildings look cold and unromantic, boxy without curves. I'm starting to believe the architects had mothers who never loved them. Maybe it does come down to love, and maybe again, this is one of those fields that has not paid enough attention to mothers and motherhood, and the marvelous thing that is. So Alain de Botton is a philosopher out of England. He has this great website called The School of Life. And if you ever have questions about life, they have a video or a book about it, and it's marvelous. But he said the creation of beauty, once viewed as a central task of the architect, has quietly evaporated from serious professional discussion and retreated to a confused private imperative. Ouch. Cameron Sinclair, when he was speaking at one of the national conventions, right at the end of his talk, he said, the most sustainable building is a building that is loved. So we talk about sustainability. Do we talk that much about love? Or enough? So remember the I Look Up campaign? Well, I had suggested I speak up. And I didn't do anything with it. Right now. I was at, go ahead, you can get it, we can wait. Sometimes I've gone in the audience and just answered the call. So I was at one of the schools within these mountains here, participating in a crit. And at one point, the student had done this interesting video, but the sound was too loud, the video didn't work, it kept stopping, stuttering, and then the lights in this brand new building were either all on or all off in the auditorium. So the thing I said, first thing you should do is fix the damn lights. But I said, okay, I couldn't see you. Music was too loud. Technology didn't work. And I said, I'm like one of the oldest guys in the room. I'm the guy with the checkbook, and you've pissed me off. Why would I write a check to you? And one of the professors stood up and looked at me and said, we teach design, not sales. Let me translate that. We don't really teach design. And the ability to present, and so I ended up creating a presentation for the students on presentation skills. And it is such an essential part, and again, because the role that you can play in the future compared to other occupations is really critical. But it has to be something that we learn more of. And this whole notion of, so I know citizen architect sort of means somebody who runs for public office. To me, citizen architect is a citizen who is engaged. And I like the term apologetics. It comes from theology. But apologetics is defense of the faith. And you learn to defend the faith, the thing you believe in, 360 degrees. So no matter what direction it's coming from, you know how to engage the conversation, the argument. So we need an apologetics of design. And we need to go to lunch more. When you break bread, you break barriers. You know, we end up sitting at our desks with our precious, having lunch. These are incredibly antisocial devices. And they said, you know, we could use these to connect to the whole world. Yeah, we only connect to the rest of the world in order to get into arguments with strangers. Elegance and eloquence are two concepts that will save the future. And again, you are better prepared to recognize what those are. How many of you have read In Praise of Shadows by Junichiro Tanizaki? Okay, a few of you. So I learned about it from an architect. But it's this marvelous, he's a novelist. It was written in the 1930s. It's a very short little book. Then he said, like, were it not for shadows, there would be no beauty. To me, that's marvelous because it is about what do you reveal? What is displayed? What is behind? How do you draw people in? Two books. Curiously, both named Curious. This one is about, Curious by Ian Leslie, the desire to know and why your future depends on it. It talks about diversive curiosity when you're a child. You want to know about everything. Then you do epistemic curiosity where you drill down to build competence. but we tend to give up diversive curiosity. And Steve Jobs talked about that really it's all about connecting dots. And that so many of us don't have enough dots to connect. Well, you connect dots by knowing things and having a context, you build a web inside your head that things can connect on. And all those little dots. But the notion of the miracle of compound interest is the miracle of multiple point perspective. And again, you're better prepared to grasp that than most people are. This one, Curious by Todd Kasdan, the one little takeaway in there, he said, couples that stay together, couples that endure, remain curious about each other. And the last one here is about play. Now, normally in my talks, I have this thing about the importance of smoking and drinking. Smokers take breaks, they talk to strangers, and because they're a reviled minority group, I mean, we hate smokers, and we think we're legitimate in hatred of them, because they're a reviled minority group, when they see each other, they instantly bond. But my dad was a doctor, my mom was a nurse, my point is not to take up smoking, but there are worse things you could take up, like sitting and not talking, except you're precious. And then the whole notion of drinking is just going out and being with people for lunch and afterwards. And that's why I'm sticking around for the rest of the conference, because I know you people like this stuff. And maybe a lot of the future depends upon somebody saying, here, hold my beer and watch this. That's what the likes of the people who created PayPal did. Now, a lot of them die horrible deaths, but an awful lot of them create things never imagined because they took risks. Now, you're probably wondering about that guy. I showed you my mom. This was her dad. This is my grandpa. This was Pop. Wearing a bowling ball bag at my brother's wedding reception. Very importantly, you need to know he did not drink. But he was an auto mechanic. Only went to 8th grade. Eighth grade is all. But he also had patents for tools he made for the automobile industry. And he taught me and my 4 brothers how to play as adults, and the importance of that, and not taking yourself too seriously. Jim Coodle is a designer. He says, if it's a good idea and it gets you excited, try it. If it bursts into flames, that's going to be exciting too. People always ask, what is your greatest failure? I always have the same answer. We're working on it right now. It's going to be awesome. And here's one of the problems is we've gotten so protective. We have gotten so fearful of failure that we don't even allow our children to fail, which is one of the most essential talents. It is a talent, learning to fail. And then that's why the kids are built close to the ground. So when they fall down, they can pick themselves back up and go, hey, we'll try again. That's the thing. We have to play. Learn to fail small and soon rather than too big and too late. Here is a marvelous last book I would recommend. I think there were 9 books I recommended, and I will give a copy of the slides so you can load those up. Finite and Infinite Games by James Cars. He's a philosophy professor at NYU. He's retired now. But he said there are 2 types of games we play. A finite game, it has rules, and the number 1 rule is you have to play to win. So if you're not playing, you've lost. If you break the rules, you've lost. Only one person could have won your job. There are lots of finite games. And then there are infinite games where there are rules, but you can play with the rules. And the number 1 rule is to play. So if you win, you lose because you're not playing anymore. Finite game, checkers. How many of you have ever played checkers? Okay. An infinite game, checkers. How many of you have ever played checkers with a child? See? Did you let the child win? And did you, so there are these things, these games that we need to play. We need to bring infinite games back into our lives. just for the joy of play. So play with that for a while. Thank you. Questions, comments, accusations? Yo, you've got the insults lined up, I know you.
So,
Yes.
how did you do with the AI and health safety and welfare ethics?
How did I do with the argument about health, safety, and welfare versus poetry? Not well at all. And like I tried to get a presentation skills presentation. And one year, another guy and I, we actually did one in the hallway. So we didn't get it approved, so we just set it up in the hallway, and we did it twice, and we had standing room only. And it was just I think it was our reputations for doing that kind of thing. And so at AAS in 2010, do you know about, at AIS they do roll call? Yes. Where they have these funny, each school is called and then they do some kind of skit or do something funny. Well, one of them, iced, Danielle McDonough, had 2 Smirnoff Ices, put them up there and they wanted her to drink it, she wouldn't do it. So when I got in my talk to the smoking and drinking, and I said drinking and everybody's laughing, and I looked over and I see there's one of those that's still unopened. I walked over, opened it up, took a drink, and there was this cheering standing ovation. And it got back to the board. And there was a little bit of concern about that. But the guy who was heading up AAS said, well, yeah, but for the first time in years, AAS might think the AA is now cool. So, but there was this real struggle. I just had a real struggle with the staff and with the conference stuff. So I've done the presentation at the regional conventions in meetings, probably maybe 10, 15 times. But in terms of this other stuff, no. And,
But I agree with you.
good. So, you all need to be poets. Yes?
What do you make of the trend or lack of intellectual curiosity or condemning intellectual elitism? I think people say, the elites. How did the elite become a negative term?
The elites became a negative term because they became so damn arrogant. And, I mean, do you ever hear the phrase, that's an idea so stupid that only an intellectual would believe it? I find, so it's ignorance that gets us into trouble and it's arrogance that keeps us there. And so this is an equal opportunity employer in terms of, I just see the elitism of, the elites just basically referring to the great unwashed and all those people in the dismissal of so much of the country. And yet, I also see just the amazing ignorance where they can't look beyond what they see on TV or in a casino. So it's mutual. We all did this. What we have, so this has been true for many, many years. We always get the government we deserve. We always get the government we deserve. I didn't realize how much we sucked. And I think this has been going on for decades. So figure out my politics from that.
So where's the tipping point of that then?
Where's the tipping point?
Yeah, at what point do we realize that it's not a good idea to have the gardener doing brain surgery? You want to have the best doctor in the world doing brain surgery.
Sure. But the most important things still need to be done by the individual. And when we take away so much and give it to the experts, that we become so passive. And so one of the slides that as I was shuffling the deck, how many of you have heard of Professor Jonathan Haidt, H-A-I-D-T? He's got a TED Talk, but he wrote a book called The Righteous Mind. And it's basically subtitled, Why Good People Can Disagree. And disagree about fundamental things. And he did this amazing sort of survey of how do conservatives and liberals make moral judgments. And they basically are looking at different things. And like liberals don't tend to look at loyalty as much as conservatives do. But So you can, he did several, I think he's got like 4 or 5 TED Talks now. But this was profound for me, just realizing I never saw it that way before. And I had put that book and another one called Kindly Inquisitors by Jonathan Rauch, which is about the new attacks on free thought. Those 2 books, when I say, break bread and break barriers, and we need to engage more, and we need to maybe supplement or take down our egos a little bit of a notch, and listen more, and being humble, that's how we do it. But I'm very serious. We need to drink more. Because, that it takes some of the edge off of the conversations, but approaching it with a sense of humility and honoring the thou in the other. Okay? We're not going to have time? Yeah, but, so Thomas Paine, one of the founding parents, he said, these are the times that try men's souls. He's never been wrong yet. And you think about like my parents, they came of age at the beginning of World War II. And you watch these movies like Dunkirk and what have you, and you think, we're struggling with angst. They were struggling with survival. And the survival of everything good. And we may be doing that very soon as well. But we have been very coddled. But again, this notion of we have to have grounding. If we don't know what we can stand on, if we question everything, we are lost. And we will lose against people who are certain, even if they're wrong. So, John.